If you've been with us the last few weeks, you know that we are working in the book of Job, this challenging little book that discusses the subject of suffering. Why do people suffer? I can't say that there are always full answers to satisfy our hearts, but certainly the answer that God has given to us, whether we like it or not, is found in the book of Job. Before we look at Job this morning, I want to take you into the book of Isaiah. This might seem like a rabbit trail. I hope it doesn't. In my small mind, this makes perfect sense to start the book of Job in Isaiah 45. You would ask why? Well, hopefully it'll make sense to you, and I'm even praying in myself that it does, and this doesn't feel like two separate sermons. But the object that you're looking at on the screen, if you're listening to this on audio, you want to Google the picture of the Cyrus cylinder. This is a 2,600-year-old object that is a clay, made of clay that is found in the British Museum. It is written in ancient Babylonian, and it gives the historic account of a man named Cyrus. Why is Cyrus interesting to us? Because this is the man that history has told us about on this tablet, but is also mentioned in Isaiah 45. This is the man who lets Israel go back to the land of Israel after their captivity into Babylon. Cyrus was a king. And Cyrus is mentioned, this very king is mentioned in Isaiah 45, and Isaiah begins his chapter with these words. Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus. Now immediately when people read this in the day that Isaiah wrote it, people would have wondered, who in the world is Cyrus? You need to know this. This is why the Word of God is remarkable. This was written 150 years before Cyrus was born. 200 years before Cyrus was a king. The book of Isaiah proclaimed that a man would be a leader and his name would be Cyrus and he would rule over a world power. Now, I don't think any one of us could even make a claim on who the next prime minister is going to be 4 or 5 years from now, let alone 200 years from now. And this man is named directly, and exactly what it says in this text is exactly what he does. The Lord says to his anointed. That's an interesting use of the word. Not trying to get too technical here, but that's the same word in the New Testament that we would have Christ, the Messiah, the anointed one. This man is a pagan king, and he is called chosen from God by God, whose right hand I have grasped. You get the picture that God himself is reaching through time and taking this boy's hand like he's a little child. I'm going to lead you. You haven't even been born yet. You will not even know who I am, but I am going to reach down into history and take a hold of you, and you are going to be my chosen vessel, my anointed one. To subdue nations before you, to loose the belts of kings, to open doors before him, that gates may not be closed. This is what he did. He walked into nation after nation after nation, and he trounced on the kings. He loosed their belts. He made them take off the robes, if you will, and no gate was closed before him. Every country he walked into and he took over. He made Persia a superpower. I will go before you, God says. This is long before it's even happened. And level the exalted places. I will break in pieces the doors of bronze and cut through the bars of iron. You can't get into that country? You watch, I am going to open it for you. You will go through the bars of iron. I will give you the treasures of darkness. This is exactly what Cyrus did. He routed every army and he pillaged every nation. He found all the secret places of their treasures and he amassed great wealth in Persia. I will give you the treasures of darkness and the hoards in secret places, that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who call you by your name. The predictive prophecy was that Cyrus would be born and do this, which is exactly what happened. Why did this happen? Because our God is a sovereign God. When he has a plan, he works out that plan. Let's continue in the text. For the sake of my servant Jacob, that's Israel, Israel, my chosen one, I call you by your name. I name you, though you do not know me. Cyrus, from what we understand in history, never gave God any credit in his life at all. Had no idea that this man was a pawn in the hand of God. 200 years before he was born, it was explained that when Cyrus comes on the scene, he is my pawn. I am going to use him to bring Israel back out of captivity. And when Cyrus came into power, he changed the laws, and he allowed, if you remember the story of how Daniel's brought into captivity and taken to Babylon, and he was going to stay there forever, except that King Cyrus comes in, trounces Babylon, sets up Persia, and then makes a new law to release any captives who have been held captive. Israel, you can go back to the land. And God has allowed all of this to happen for the purposes of Israel being set free. God had a plan. I am the Lord, and there is no other. That's the context of these famous words. Nobody else can do this. Nobody else calls the future and lays out a plan and then has that plan come to fruition. I am in charge. You think you go to the election box and you make a little tick on your box? No. Let me tell you, at the end of the day, God is deciding what happens. He rules and reigns over all nations, over all peoples. He has a plan. His plan will not be thwarted. It will always be lived out because God is sovereign. I am the Lord. No kidding. There is no other. No kidding. Besides me, there is no God. He's declaring, nobody else can do this. I do this. I equip you, though you do not know me. Again, underlining Cyrus's ignorance of God. That people may know from the rising of the sun and from the west that there is none besides me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. I am the King of the universe. I am in charge of the nations. I call it before it happens, and I make it happen. And then this famous little verse in Isaiah 45, verse 7. I form light. This is God speaking. I create darkness. I make well-being and create calamity. I am the Lord who does these things. I create light. I create darkness, I make well-being, I allow calamity. I do it all. And God, in this simple vignette of history, by this prophetic presentation of what's going to take place, displays to us his awesome mind in planning things out and relays to us that even in the wickedness of King Cyrus trouncing in and causing all kinds of grief to nations, I am in charge of the grief. God is not saying he is responsible for the grief. People make their own free will choices. But God uses evil for his own ends. Evil becomes, to God's great scheme, just another tool. He is never responsible for it. It is not his fault that it's here. He does not take the responsibility for what happens, but he allows it and he uses it for his own purposes. When God has a plan, his plan will never be thwarted, even from the ignorance and the wickedness of men. Psalm 86, verses 8 to 10. There are none like you among the gods, O Lord, nor are there any works like yours. All the nations you have made shall come and worship before you, O Lord. Let me ask you, when has this ever happened? That all the nations you have made shall come and worship before you and shall glorify your name. Do you know any point in history when all the nations have come and gathered to worship the Lord's name? What is that? This has yet to take place. For you are great and do wondrous things. You alone are God. Throughout the scriptures, we see that God has a plan. Everything is moving according to God's decisions. And in so doing, sometimes calamity is a part of that plan. Sometimes evil is a tool in God's hands to ultimately fulfill his ends. Sometimes we say, I don't like my lot in life. I don't like where we are in history. Well, guess what? It's because God isn't finished yet. We are halfway through the great story of what God is doing. Yes, sometimes in the middle, it looks dark and grim and horrible. But at the end of it all, there is a reason. God is moving everything toward his purposes and toward his reasons. There is no detail that is too small for God to look after. Famous words by Jesus. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And not one of them will fall to the ground apart from my Father. I know every single thing that happens in this entire universe. There is not one rogue molecule. I'm in charge of it all. Even the hairs of your head are all numbered. Which, of course, we could make a quick joke about that. Some of you. 0 is a number. God still knows your number. This is why Romans 8:28, it just talks about God's character. We know that for all those who love God, all things work together for good. This is the inevitable end. All things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. But our problem is we know this theologically. We understand this in our hearts, in our heads on some level. But there are moments in our lives when the calamity around us, if that's the word to use, seems so dark and so overwhelming that we actually lose focus on who God is. Welcome to Job chapter 3. I don't know if you've ever read this chapter. We're not working through this book chapter by chapter. This is the last time we're going to spend looking at an entire chapter. We're mostly going to be looking at chunks of the book to try and hop our way through it. Won't take us long. Job chapter 3 is very, very plain where Job is at. His problem is, if I can say this politely, is that Job has ceased to focus on who God is. He has allowed his mind to focus on where he is. And this, if I can say with all gracious attitude that I have and find and muster, this is exactly my own problem. This is exactly your problem. The way we get out of our darkness is to focus on the character and the nature of God. And too often we find ourselves looking at where we are and forgetting the big picture. And I'm not saying this is easy. Listen to Job's words. After this, Job opened his mouth. What is after what? His friends had come. I haven't even mentioned those friends. We'll get into them next week. They sat with him in silence for a week. He's had all the misery that you can imagine from chapter 1 and 2. If you haven't been a part of that, read the book, listen to the messages. After this, after all that he's been through, sitting on the garbage heap in silence, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. Do you remember his wife came to him and said, "Curse God and die." Well, what does Job do now? He doesn't curse God. He says, "Curse the day of my birth." Now, that's a strange word. We don't use that word very frequently in our vocabulary. It's got this mystical connotation of a curse. Someone has cursed me. This is cursed. We've got this kind of odd sort of sense of the word. Well, guess what? That is exactly the sense of the word that Job means this in. He literally is asking for the removal of God's blessing. That in a sense, in a biblical sense, is what a curse is. It is the removal of God's hand. Let things run their course. Keep God out of it. Let it be disaster. God is a God of goodness. And if he removes his hand, it will shrivel into nothing. And he's calling for his day. What day? His birthday. The day of his birth, he's cursing it. This is a man who has reached a place of darkness that I dare say politely, I doubt any one of us have ever been. Verse 2, and Job said. Don't want to waste your time this morning, but I just have to say, this verse is not in our Bible memory booklet. This is the second shortest verse in the Bible, 3 words long, and we're not memorizing it together. Job chapter 3, verse 2, and Job said. Verse 3, let the day perish on which I was born, and the night that said, a man is conceived. Let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor light shine upon it. Job is calling on the powers that be. If he has the ability, is what he's saying, if I could call, it's like a prayer. It's a prayer in reverse. I am asking for time to go backwards. I am praying that my birthday would no longer exist, that the day itself would perish, that the day I was born would not be there, that you would take God a magic eraser and make that day disappear from the calendar of time. That let that day be darkness. The sun doesn't even come up. It's like the sun goes down the night before, skips an entire day, let that day be darkness, let it be night, and then the sun comes up again. Don't let the sun come up on that day. Remove that day. This is his curse. This is a man who has gone to a place that probably none of us have been. Let gloom and darkness claim it. This are the non-substance things of a day. The ethereal untouchables, gloom and darkness and clouds. Don't let there be any substance to that day. Let it just remain a dream state, an ethereal state, a concept that we can't put our finger on because there's nothing there. This is his cry. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. There's a poetic phrase. That night, let thick darkness seize it. Don't you love poetry? Let me ask you something. What is the difference between thin darkness and thick darkness? I don't know. Darkness is darkness. But how picturesque, how plain and clear, how you feel the weight of the burden of his agony and his sorrow. I am calling that the day be a day of thick darkness. Thick makes me think that you can't even move through it. It's like a day covered in corn syrup darkness. I don't know, is that bizarre? I mean, it's just so thick, you can't, it's just stagnant. We were once in a cave. It was a tourist thing in Virginia. You go down in this cave. It's a beautiful big underground, cavern and stalactites and stalagmites and all the bits and pieces and the chemical drips that come out it was really cool. We reach a point, you're in this little tour, everyone's along. He's like, everybody hold on to the handrail at the side. Okay. And then he flips the lights off. I have never been in darkness like that in my life. He says, put your hand in front of your face. You literally, I never have experienced, and it's still so vivid, there was an immediate sense of, I am glad I'm holding a handrail. Because if I take a step, I have no idea, I can't even remember what it looks like in here. Darkness, like you have never seen darkness. That's the picture that Job's calling on. Let it not rejoice among the years of the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. This is his curse. Reverse time. Make the sun go backwards. Make the calendar, the great cosmic calendar of the world, Father, take that day and erase that day. Do you think this curse is going to come true? This is where his heart has taken him. Behold, let that night be barren. Now, he's really being myopic, if I can say politely. Now he's asking that he realizes when that day is erased, the day of his birth, it would also be the day that anything else happened that day would also be erased. That entire night would eliminate everybody else who was born around the world. I don't care, is what he says. Let that night be barren. Now, if I can say politely, this is exactly my own problem, and I know this for a fact. When I have those down days, those melancholy days, those dark times, when you find yourself just trying to get through, trying to drag your feet, if I'm honest, if I'm really honest, it is because I am focused on me. All I can think of is only this would happen if they would change the environment, if I could be happy, if they would do that so I could be pleased. Everything needs to change for me. We get myopic. We get introverted. It is natural. It is normal. I am not calling it sinful, but if you can be honest with yourself in your dark moments, this is our deepest problem. We fail to see there is a God who allows calamity for his purposes, to his ends. All we see in the moment is me. Poor me. And I'm not suggesting that Job is not doing anything that all of us don't do. Let those curse it who curse the day. Now he's calling on anybody who has any magical powers. those wizards and people of dark arts. If you can curse something, I'm calling you, let them curse today. Those are ready to rouse up Leviathan. This is an interesting reference. We're not sure 100% what this word means. Leviathan is a creature of the sea. We understand later from the book of Job, we think that this is probably an extinct creature. In Job's day, it was alive, it was well. They knew it. In our day, we're not sure what it is. We would probably call it a dinosaur in our present day vocabulary. Some people think perhaps it was a whale or something of that nature. But what he's saying is, regardless, it's irrelevant. What he's asking is, if you can control the animals, if you can call up the animals from the sea to do something, you're the people that I'm calling on to curse this day. Those powerful people. He's seeking and reaching for anything who will help him. This man's in a dark place. Let the stars of its dawn be dark. Let it hope for light but have none. Nor see the eyelids of the morning. Don't you love poetry? The eyelids of the morning. When dawn just peeks itself over the hills. Just the fresh little eyelids of the morning. Because it did not shut the doors of my mother's womb. The forces of nature allowed me to be conceived, and nor hide trouble from my eyes. Now we ask the question, why? Isn't this what we do? Why? Why is this happening? Why is this going on? Why? Well, Job's just like you and I. Why did I not die at birth? Don't we ask that question sometimes? We see a child come into the world who's deformed and got all kinds of medical issues and problems beyond our understanding, and you just ask the question, why? Well, why does God let these things happen? Why? He's asking the same question. Why did I not die at birth? And come out from the womb and expire? Why? Why did the knees receive me? This is a rather graphic picture of childbirth. A woman kneeling perhaps in a position of giving birth, and the child comes through the birth canal, lands at her knees. Why did the knees receive me? Why did I have a mother who picked me up and suckled me? Why the breast that I should nurse? Why? Why was I given somebody who cared for me? Why wasn't I left on the ground? He's asking. For then I would have laid down and been quiet. I would have slept. Then I would have been at rest. If only I had died, then I would be at peace, is what he's saying. Do you see what Job's doing? He's actually in such a dark place that he's actually beginning to extol the virtues of death. He's actually beginning to think that that is a really good idea. You notice, please, if you'll see, nowhere through this is there any talk of suicide. He is asking that God would do this. He is recognizing and acknowledging that his life is from God and God owns his life. And if anything's going to change, it has to come from the supernatural. He is not declaring or thinking about anything to do with himself in that regard. Understand this. I would have slept, then I would have been at rest with kings and counselors of the earth. He is now equating that if he had just died, he would be in the same place as great people. People who lived lavish lives, the kings and counselors who built ruins for themselves. They had built monuments, these great people, princes who had gold and filled their house with silver. Those great people, I would be equal with them. If I was in the ground like they're now in the ground, we would be exactly in the same place. How is that so bad, he's saying? That sounds like a good idea to me. I would be equal to a king. Or why? Again, the question. Why was I not as a hidden, stillborn child? Why wasn't I a miscarriage? As infants who never see the light. This is where he begins to shift now. There the wicked cease from troubling. He's talking about death. And there the weary are at rest. There the prisoners are at ease together. And then they hear not the voice of their taskmaster. Again, he's extolling the virtues of being dead. This man is in a dark place. He's saying that those who are slaves, they're no longer slaves. You're in prison, you're no longer in prison. You had a taskmaster, you had to work at hard labor. You no longer have to work, you're free. You're finally free. And you can see almost the picture, the metaphor that he's using. That I'm in this crippled body. I'm in this state that cannot change. It has become my taskmaster. I need to be free. I long to be free. Some of you know exactly what this feels like on a physical level, on a daily basis. Some of you have gone through medical issues that have taken you emotionally to places that none of us have ever been or ever want to go. This is a human response. The small and the great are there. Again, he's talking about the grave. And the slave is free from his master. Again, extolling the virtues, the benefits of being dead. Why is light given to him who is in misery? Great question. Why does God let people live whose life entirely is nothing but agony and difficulty? Why? Why is light given to him who is in misery, and life to the bitter of soul, who long for death, but it comes not? They want to die and they can't die. Who dig for it more than for treasure, for hidden treasures. Who rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they find the grave. Why does God let people go on suffering? People that want to die and can't die. Why? Why? Why is Job's question. Do you know why Job's asking the question? There is no answer to the question, because the answer is found in the character of God. The answer is found in the reasons of God. The answers are found in the dark places that God chooses to allow his purposes to be filled out, even using calamity. Do I know what God is doing in his own plan? Do I know what's happening in God's mind? No. Do we ask those questions? Yes. Will we get answers? No. We will never know the answers, because we're actually asking a question that is found only in the mind of God, only in the plan of God, and we are called, as easy as this is to say, and as impossible as this is to live out, we are called to depend on and to trust and to lean on the grace of God and trust him through our dark times. Am I saying that's easy? Am I saying we don't go to a place like Job has been? Am I saying we don't get emotional and go to the depths of despair, and it could even use the word depression? No, I'm not saying we don't do that. But I am saying that the way out is to recognize and acknowledge on some level that there is something bigger than me that is going on. Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? Great question. Why is light? Light. Why is light? Why does he see the sun? Why is life given to somebody whose future, whose way, whose plan, whose reason for being here is hidden? There seems to be no reason for you to be born. You're not good to anybody. Whom God has hedged in. He's kept them. Remember Satan said, you've hedged Job in, and that's why he doesn't curse you. You've hedged him in so that evil can't get at him. Now Job uses the same word. Now I'm hedged in, and God's goodness can't get in or can't get out. He's now using the same idea here. For my sighing comes instead of my bread, and my groanings are poured out like water. The word groanings doesn't really matter. It's a Hebrew idea of lamenting, of loud crying, of wailing out loud. My groanings have been poured out like water. For the thing that I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, but trouble comes. Job chapter 3. What a fantastic, uplifting, glorious little passage. Isn't that amazing? And that's found in this book. Do you know what that tells us about our own lives and our own hearts? It tells us a lot about our emotions. Now, this is kind of an aside, but I personally find this interesting, so I'm going to throw this at you, even though it probably doesn't even matter, and you'll never even remember this. But interestingly enough, when Job asks God to curse the day, he actually goes through the entire creation week and asks to undo everything that God has done in creation. Let me remind you what he said. Let that day be darkness. What did God say when he first created things on the first day? Let there be light. What does Job say? May God above not seek it, nor light shine upon it. Let that day stay in darkness. Let the sun not rise upon that day. Let the day be darkness all day long. What did God do on day 2? He separated the light from the darkness. Day 3, let gloom and darkness claim it. This is that ethereal idea that there's no substance to the day. Let the day have no reality to it. Let clouds, vapor, let him dwell on it so it remains in sort of that dream state. Let the day be non-existent. What does God do on day 3? He separates the waters when the heavens gathered together in one place, and he made substance. Let there be dry land. Day 4, what does Job cry out? Let it not rejoice among the day of the year. Reverse the sun. Make the planets go backwards. Take your massive calendar and reverse the calendar so that my day is not included in your cosmic calendar. Let it not come into the number of the months. What does God do on day 4? He makes the calendar. Let the planets be for signs and seasons and days and years. What does Job cry out? He says, let those curse it who curse the day. Let those who have the ability to rise up and to deal with the sea creatures, let those people who have that kind of power curse the day. What did God do on day 5? He made the sea creatures. Day 6, what does Job cry out? Why did I not die at birth? Why am I here? Why do I exist? I shouldn't even exist. I don't want to exist. What did God do on day 6? He made man exist. Let us make man in our own image. What did Job cry out? For I would have laid down and been quiet. I would have slept. I would have been at rest. If only I could die, I would be at rest. What did God do on day 7? It was the day that God rested. Job is calling on the very reversal of creation. This is how dark he is. This is the place he has gone to. And what is he doing? With all due respect, without ever trying to sound like I'm putting Job down, because he is us and we are him. But this man is all about himself. He is asking for God to change his plans. He is asking God to change the universe to suit me. He is asking God to change his great creation so that I would get what I want. That's how we behave. That is exactly what we do. And there's a few lessons, if I can say, that we learn as we look at this little dark chapter from the book of Job. First thing I want to say is you'll never find that God condemns Job ever for his feelings of despair. We never see, in fact, we're told from the beginning of this book, very plainly and clearly, I've told you this, all through this, Job never sins. It is not a sin to feel dark, gloomy, heaviness, and emotion. This is a normal, natural response. It can become sinful if we allow it to, but Job never gets rebuked by God. That is an encouragement to us. God knows, if I can say it this way, if I can even pretend to say something that God knows. God knows that our emotions, he recognizes who we are. He knows our makeup, and he acknowledges, it's like he gives us grace to just go through our moping. He realizes what we're doing, that our minds have been distorted from seeing the big picture. We're distracted from the great truth of who God is. He recognizes and allows us, even in these dark times. You remember Elijah on Mount Carmel, he asked God to take his life. What does God do? Does he come and rebuke him? No. He brings him food, brings him water, tells him to take a rest. He wakes up, Elijah's a miserable guy. What does God do? Gives him some water, gives him some food, take a rest. He looks after him. He doesn't seek to rebuke him, doesn't want to change his mind. We learn from Job 3, this is hard to remember at the time of your darkness, but what you're feeling may not be a reflection of reality at all. God has not abandoned you. He's never far away from you. And this is impossible for us to believe in that moment because all we can see is our own depths of agony and pain. If I have any consolation to you at all, the answer to our deepest, darkest problems is found in the character of God. And if we could focus on who he is and what he's doing and all of his fullness, we would understand. God has his ways. I'm sure you're familiar with Joni Eareckson Tada. She's been made very popular of late, 21st century writer, 20th century author. She sings, she paints. She's known because she is a quadriplegic, and she's truly an amazing woman. When you probably know her story, she's 18, 19 or so. She dove off of a dock, didn't realize the depth of the water, hit the bottom with a force that snapped her spine. She floated to the surface, face down in the water, had no means of getting out of the water. She was swimming with her sister and was just hoping in the water that her sister would notice that she had not surfaced. She waited there she said, for way too long, longer than she ever dreamed, and she was sure she was going to drown. It so happened her sister had not noticed anything about her dive, had not realized she had left the dock, did not know where she was. But her sister, by the providence of God, was bitten by a sand crab. And when she jumped with her toe, she shouted out, turned her back to the water and shouted to her sister, "Watch out for the sand crabs," and realized that she saw something floating on the surface of the water, her sister's blonde hair. And her sister found and rescued and saved Joni Erickson's life. She's a paraplegic. She has suffered more than any one of us in this room, with, I can say politely, has ever known to suffer. And this woman is a believer like you have never met. Have you ever read any of her books? She is absolutely phenomenal. Phenomenal. I don't say that to exalt her, but her heart has found the place of going through turmoil and darkness. It is comfort to me to realize that God did not condemn me for plying him with questions, she writes. I didn't have to worry about insulting God for my outbursts in time of stress and fear and pain. My despair wasn't going to shock him. God, according to the book of Job, is never threatened by our questions. So did I find answers for the deepest, darkest question about life and total paralysis? Just one. And it is enough. Oh, the depths of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable his judgments and his paths beyond tracing out. That is the last answer you thought you were going to find. Where does her heart go? It goes to the character of God. I have no idea why God is doing this, but how awesome is God that he, in his wisdom, is doing something in my life and in this generation through my paralysis. Oh, the depths of the wisdom and the knowledge of God. She doesn't, pardon my pun, she doesn't take this sitting down. Okay? She doesn't just roll over and enjoy this, that she's a paraplegic. But she has come to find that place of peace and rest and comfort because she acknowledges and recognizes the God who cared for her and is caring for her right through the midst of her tragedy. This is our God. He is always in charge. He always has a plan. He calls something before it even happens, and he uses calamity in our lives for his purposes, for his ends. Are they dark? Are they hard? Do they take us low? Yes, but he remains the glorious, sovereign God. Amen.